Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village Diary by Miss Reed. Since the gale, the weather has turned soft and warm. Mr. Willett tells me it is St. Luke's little summer, and very welcome it is. Miss Jackson and I decided to take the whole school out for a nature walk to enjoy it all. We made for the little lane that turns off by the Beetle and Wedge and rises steadily until it peters out high up on the windy downs. The children dallied in the lane, scrambling up the high banks to collect the hazelnuts which flourish there. "Give us a bunk up," rang the cry, and one would obligingly put his shoulder down and hoist his friend higher in the hedge. We meandered along, eating nuts and blackberries, and even sloes and damsons, which grow thickly, powdered with the blue bloom among their spikes. We found a patch of dry grass halfway up the slope, sheltered by a clump of stunted thorn bushes, and here we sat to rest. The view of Fairacre below us was clear in the limpid October air. There is a unique atmosphere about a fine October day. The sky is a burning blue, which combined with the golden and auburn glow of the trees creates a sparkle and glory unseen at other more vaunted periods of the year. From this distance, the yellow elm trees by the school looked like the chubby pieces of cauliflower that one spears from piccalilli, and in the field beyond we could see Samson, Mr. Roberts' house cow, placidly grazing. Blue smoke plumes waved from cottage chimneys, and Joseph Coggs was delighted to see his mother pegging washing on her line far below. Some of the fields were still bright with stubble, but most of them had already been plowed and lay clean and brown, awaiting next year's crops. We spent a long time there, gazing and speculating, drinking in great draughts of scented air. I was brought to earth by a vicious blow across the back. Startled, I turned to see Ernest grinding something fiercely into the grass. "A dumb old wasp," he explained. "Crawling up you, miss. They always stings worse if they're sleepy. Ah, well, he's had it now." I thanked him and called to the children that we must return. They came reluctantly, bearing all sorts of treasures with them. Rose hips, feathers, and toadstools were among their souvenirs, but Eric was struggling along with a colossal knobbly flint, whose weight threatened to age him considerably. When I remonstrated with him, he turned an accusing eye upon me. "It's a meteorite," he told me. "Saw one just like it on the telly." And shouldering his burden, he bore it painfully back to Fairacre School. Malcolm Annet's christening party was a great occasion. The sun shone through St. Patrick's windows, catching the gleaming brass on the altar and the tawny chrysanthemums which Mrs. Partridge had arranged. Mrs. Moffat had made the christening gown, a miracle of tiny stroked gathers and finely pleated tucks, with a froth of old lace at the hem. Apart from making a few popping sounds as he withdrew a wet thumb from his mouth, the baby behaved with the greatest decorum, even suffering his pink forehead to be doused with water from a silver scallop in quite large quantities. Ted, Mr. Annet's brother, was resplendent in his best gray suit, and the other godfather was in uniform. They spoke their responses in manly tones, undertaking to renounce the works of the devil on behalf of the infant I held, as I, as godmother, did too. It was hard to believe that the angelic bundle was conceived and born in sin, I thought privately, watching the red admiral butterfly hovering in the church porch as the vicar's beautiful voice fluted benignly on. Mrs. Pringle had come to the service with her cherry-decorated hat on and a very dashing white organdy blouse which had once been Mrs. Partridge's and had been the pièce de résistance at a recent jumble sale. Outside, whilst Brother Ted fussed with his camera and we squeezed obediently together in order to make a compact group, she came up to admire the baby. "It's a wonder either of you are here to tell the tale," she told Mrs. Annet. "That front room of yours is nothing better than a morgue, facing north and dripping damp. You mind you has all the rest in your back bedroom with the hot tank in it." Mrs. Annett assured her that she would give the matter her attention and invited her to join in the historic group, which she did with the greatest pride. The christening party at Beech Green Schoolhouse was a hilarious affair. Miss Clare had come over from her cottage, and we found a corner together. "I didn't come to the service," she explained, "as Dr. Martin insists I should have a little rest in the afternoon." I thought that this sounded ominous and inquired if she had had any more attacks. For a moment she was silent and then confided, "Well, yes, my dear, I have. Doctor says I shall be quite all right if I rest more, so I'm being sensible and lying down every afternoon." There was not time to say much, for the cake was being cut and toasts drunk to the future felicity of young Malcolm Annett. But for me, at least, a shadow had fallen on the festivities. Mr. Annett implored me to come over to talk to Brother Ted, who is a mathematics professor and who had just been honored by an invitation to lecture at Cambridge and was very pleased about it all. With becoming modesty, Ted admitted that his subject was to be the triangular isotopic hebdomadal and its associated quotients, or something very like that, and would I care to be present? Though decidedly flattered by his kindness, I was secretly glad that I was already engaged to go with Amy to the theater on the same day, so that with polite sounds of regret we passed to other and more intelligible topics. As 6 o'clock approached and young Malcolm, after patiently waiting for us to finish our refreshments, now vociferously demanded his own, we made our farewells. I looked around for Miss Clare, hoping to take her back with me, but she had slipped away unobserved, and I determined to call on her before many days went by. On Monday morning, Miss Jackson did not arrive until nearly 11 o'clock. She had been away for the weekend and had missed the evening train. I was inclined to be sympathetic at first, despite the difficulty I had had in collecting dinner money and savings money, reading parents' notes and marking 2 registers during the first part of the morning. However, it gradually came out through chance remarks that Miss Jackson had had no intention of catching the Sunday evening train, as she had had the opportunity to visit Miss Crabbe, who happened to be staying in her neighborhood. So engrossed had they become in educational and psychological affairs that they had stayed talking until 11 o'clock. On hearing this, my own flabbergasted rage gave way to the deepest sympathy for Miss Crabbe's long-suffering hosts, who could never have bargained for such verbosity when they invited Miss Jackson to tea to renew their guest's acquaintance. I said nothing during school hours about this behavior, thinking it better to cool down. But after supper I pointed out, as mildly as I could, that the school must come first, and that it was essential that she appeared at the correct time after a weekend. To my astonishment, I was given to understand that I was old-fashioned, narrow-minded, and petty. Furthermore, the inestimable advantage of listening to Miss Crabbe's wisdom far outweighed such mundane affairs as collecting dinner money and the like, all of which could be performed by those with inferior minds, like mine, I supposed, thus giving the more visionary educationalists, presumably Miss Jackson, a chance of using their talents for the good of the community. When I had regained my breath, I said that I had never heard such utter nonsense, that I would have preferred a straightforward apology, that an early night might be a good thing after her late session, that she appeared overheated, and that if she cared for a dose of milk of magnesia, there was a bottle in the medicine cabinet. At this, she flounced toward the door, saying that no one had ever understood her except Miss Crabbe, that it was no wonder that English education was in the state it was when prosy old women with antediluvian ideas still ruled the roost, and that she didn't want any supper. With that, she slammed the door, pounded up to her bedroom, slammed that door too, and was seen no more by me. I was amused to find later that the top of a loaf and a hunk of cheese had vanished from the larder, and that the milk of magnesia had been used. In all fairness to Miss Jackson, I must record that she appeared very humbly at the breakfast table, apologized handsomely, and brought me back a melon from Caxley on her next visit as a peace offering. Moreover, she went out to do her playground duty much more promptly and even got up a little earlier in the mornings so that the outburst had good results. A day or two after this, I was busy putting in some tulip bulbs under the front windows when I heard a hoot and saw Dr. Martin driving by. I waved and he drew up. "What are you putting in?" he asked, seeing my trowel. I told him that I had treated myself to 24 pink tulips and that he must look out for them in the spring. At this moment, Mrs. Pringle appeared on her way to sweep the school out. Dr. Martin hailed her. "How's that leg?" Mrs. Pringle's gait, which had been normal, took on a shuffle and hop action, rather like a wooden-legged person is saying a polka. She drew a great shuddering sigh. "Oh, doctor, if you only knew what I went through. Mighty little sympathy I gets, or asks for that matter, but if you was to realize the way it sometimes burns, then sometimes prickles, then sometimes jumps, then sometimes twitches, you'd wonder I didn't go down on my bended knee, always supposing I could go down on my bended knee, which is well nigh impossible, as the vicar can vouch for me, having me to lean forward in the choir stalls prayer time, and beg of you to cut it off me." Dr. Martin said, "Oh, rats to that. Got your elastic stocking on?" Mrs. Pringle nodded haughtily. "Then get a bit of weight off," said her unsympathetic medical advisor. "You must be 3 stone too heavy. No starch, no fat, and no sugar. That'll do it." "Some people," began Mrs. Pringle with awful deliberation, "has a hard day's work to do every day that God sends, scrubbing, sweeping, carrying buckets, and cleaning up after others, who shall be nameless. And hard work can't be tackled on an empty stomach, as my mother could have told you any day. I don't suppose I eats more'n a butterfly, but a woman with my job needs a trifle of cold bacon or bread pudding to keep her going if she's to do all she's asked." "Try skipping, then," suggested the doctor as she paused for breath. Mrs. Pringle ignored this facetious interruption and boomed inexorably on. "Them as does their work, so-called, a-settin' in a chair, writing rubbish what no one understands, is in a hand what no one can read, or at best getting ailin' folks to strip out when the wind's in the east, so's they can poke 'em about sharper than with their cold fingers. Them, I says, has no need for half the food that finds its way down their gullets. Gentry food at that, too. Pheasants, partridges, and other dainties I see hanging up in the back porch as I passes." Dr. Martin here let out a delighted guffaw, but Mrs. Pringle finished her tirade unperturbed. "And if them that sits to work needs that lot, stands to reason them that stands and bends and kneels to labor needs a fat lot more." "You wicked old tartar," said Dr. Martin affectionately. "I'll come to your funeral when you pop off with a fatty heart. Get along with you, you fascinating hussy." Bridling, Mrs. Pringle limped ostentatiously toward the school, her stout back registering extreme disapproval. Dr. Martin watched her go. "How I do love that old termagant," he said. Just then my kettle let off a shrill whistle. "Going to make one?" asked the doctor hopefully, getting smartly out of his car and opening the front door for me before I could answer. Meekly, I took off my gardening gloves and we went into the kitchen. Over the tea tray, I broached the subject of Miss Clare. "I didn't think she looked at all well last week," I said. "Is there anything else wrong besides her heart?" Dr. Martin looked steadily across the table at me. "Do you really want to know?" "Of course I do." "Well," said the doctor, replacing his cup very carefully, "to be blunt, she doesn't get enough to eat." "Good God!" I cried, appalled. My own cup crashed onto the saucer. "You don't mean that?" I thought of Miss Clare's larder with the gleaming rows of jam and chutney of her own making. I thought of the onions hanging up, the carrots and parsnips in the old well-scrubbed wooden rack. I thought of my last supper party there, of the cold brisket, the tart, the salad, the glinting silver and snowy cloth. As if he could read my mind, Dr. Martin spoke again. Yes, I know she keeps a good store cupboard. There's not a morsel of waste there. She uses every bit of produce from her garden that she can, but she can't afford to use it all. She was giving baskets of windfall apples to the neighbors last week. Before, she would have turned them into jelly, but 3 pounds of preserving sugar costs half a crown or so, and that wants finding. This is awful, I began. Dr. Martin went on ruthlessly. She gets next to no butcher's meat, and things that she should have, like liver and cream and a drop of burgundy, are beyond her these days. It stands to reason. She's got the old age pension and a minute teaching one, and though she owns that little cottage, she still has to keep it in repair. She told me last week that the repairs to her well came to over 5 pounds. Her shoes cost between 10 and 15 shillings to mend. God knows how long she wears her clothes. Her house linen was her mother's, and when it goes, she can't afford to replace it. Her father thatched the roof just before he died. 20 years ago now? And it'll need doing again before long. How's Miss Clare ever to get 200 pounds together for that? Fool that I am, I said passionately. I should have thought of that, but somehow she's always so neat, and the house is so beautiful, and she's always given me such good meals. I couldn't go on. Oh, she'd give her guests a good meal, agreed the doctor brutally. You'd have butter, too, but I noticed there was only margarine in the larder when I went there last week for a teaspoon. Indeed, I thought there's mighty little that this wise old man misses about his patients' backgrounds. Mind you, she's got a kind of instinctive knowledge of nutrition handed down from peasant forebears. She sprinkles parsley around pretty heavily. She makes herself rough oatmeal porridge. But she doesn't have all the sugar and milk with that she should have. She bakes a bit of bread now and again when the oven's on, but naturally she's sparing with the firing these days. You don't mean she's getting cold as well, I said piteously. Hardly surprising, rejoined the old man. And she can't work as she did in the garden. Peter Lamb, poor fellow, used to dig it for nothing. That idle neighbor of hers will condescend to turn it over for 3 bob an hour, which she can't afford anyway. I noticed that last year's potato patch is less rough this year. Less food again. He pushed his chair back from the table as if the matter were closed. I leaned across and caught his wrist. Now sit down. You're not going till we've thought of something out. I must help her. Besides, I can't stick this out alone until I see some way round it. The doctor smiled, hitched his chair up again, and passed his cup across to be refilled. For one tough old schoolmarm with a good caning arm, you've got a remarkably soft heart, he commented. Good Lord, girl, Miss Clare's only one of hundreds. They're the new poor, fighting a rear-guard action and keeping the standard flying. I'll bet Miss Clare puts a shilling in the collecting tin next Poppy Day, and that chap next door who's picking up 12 pounds a week won't be able to put his hand on a bit of change. I know all that, I said, but come on now, let's be practical. How can we help? She won't let you. She's too proud. Don't be such a maddening man, I almost shouted. You come in here torturing me and making me give you cups of tea. Oh, sorry, I forgot to fill it up. I pushed it across hastily. And you put me into an absolute Fantodden fever. You wanted to know, he pointed out. And now I do know we must do something, or I shall go clean out of my mind, and the children will find me sitting with straws in my hair, drooling when they come tomorrow, and you'll have another patient on your hands. This outburst appeared to sober him. I was glad to see, for no doctor, however zealous or impoverished, cares to hear of another patient being added to his burden these days. The answer, I think, he said slowly, is a nice, easy-going lodger, like your Miss Jackson. I'd be delighted for Miss Clare to have her, I said, but I don't know that she's exactly easy-going. Well, someone like that, pursued the doctor. She's got a spare bedroom in that front parlor, too, that's hardly ever used. Then she'd eat more. She'd be more conscientious about giving a lodger a nourishing meal, and she'd have some as well. It sounds a good idea, I agreed, but could she stand the extra work? Speaking from a medical point of view, I think any extra work involved, and there needn't be much, I'd have a word with the prospective lodger and tell her to pull her weight with the bed making and lifting and so on, would be offset by the advantages. She wouldn't be anxious about making ends meet. There's nothing more fraying than that week after week. She'd have someone else to think about, which would take her mind off her own ills a bit. Solitary people can't help dwelling on them a bit too much. And she'd have more money to spend on food, and that's the main thing. He drained his cup and then rose. Now I must be off. Think it over, and think about Miss Jackson going there. I'll tackle Miss Clare. I shall tell her I'd feel happier if she had someone in the house with her. I'll suggest her sister. That'll properly put her back up, and she'll consider a lodger much more readily. Honestly, I said, flabbergasted, I'd no idea you were such a Machiavelli. But I will suggest to Miss Jackson that she might like to make a change. But somehow I don't know if she's quite right for Miss Clare. She'll be better off with Miss Clare than with you, said the doctor shrewdly. Cooped up together all day? Why, you don't want to hear her news when she gets back here to tea. You know it all. Give her Miss Clare to pour her troubles out to, and she'll blossom like a rose, and so will her landlady. She'll look forward to her coming in to hear all the school gossip. Do all three of you good, I know that. We proceeded to the front door, and I surveyed my tulip bed still unfinished. And what does Miss Jackson give you for board and lodging? He asked. I told him £3, which seemed to suit us both. He threw up his hands in mock horror. You bloated profiteer, he exclaimed. On top of your fat salary, too. You pass her over to Miss Clare, my girl, and put that £3 into her pocket. This bit of byplay I recognized for what it was, a subtle way of relieving the tension of the past hour and of bringing us back to a more normal plane. He pointed to my tulip bulbs. Bought with your ill-gotten gains, I suppose. He could not resist one final stab. Miss Clare makes her garden pretty with slips that friends give her. She might be able to afford bulbs if she had a lodger. At this moment, Mrs. Pringle, her work completed, came limping back, bucket in hand. You are the most cruel, heartless creature I've ever met, I told him, and hailed Mrs. Pringle. Don't you agree? I asked her, above the noise of the car's engine. Ah, said Mrs. Pringle with much satisfaction, that he is. He's a walking monument of vice. We stood side by side, waving goodbye to him. But for once, Mrs. Pringle and I were united. Having given the children an earnest little homily on thrift and the wisdom of putting some part of their money away, however small, for a rainy day, I was shocked to find that I have 1 7 only in my own purse. When I think of what I earn and my profiteering £3 a week in addition, I am ashamed of myself, for nearly every month I seem to spend the last few days of it counting out pennies and shamelessly embezzling needlework money or dinner money until Jim Bryant brings the check. This is another painful reminder of Miss Clare's plight, which is constantly in my mind. Since the doctor's visit, I have approached Miss Jackson, who seemed unflatteringly delighted to quit my portals if she could find another resting place. So that is one step forward. I have no doubt that before half-term is here, in another week's time, Dr. Martin will have his well-laid plans in working trim. And we'll see how those plans get on next time.